Welcome back to Record Live. It's great to have you with us today. Daniel Livingston is our guest today. Now, Daniel, you and I used to work together in this building, Adventist Media. It
We
seems like
did.
a very long time ago that you used to work here. And I think I'm sitting roughly where the It Is Written sort of section used to be. They've remodeled the office a little
Yep.
bit. So I may even be
Yep.
sort of roughly where your office used to be.
If it smells like a dead possum, you're in the right spot.
There have been a few possums. There have been a few possums expire in the roof of this building over the years, but we won't dwell too much on that. Now, Daniel, before we get on to today's topic, which is based on your article, it was called About Authority. Does science vindicate the Adventist health message? So we'll talk about that topic a little bit today. We'll explore that and unpack that with you. But just tell us briefly what you've been doing since your time at Adventist Media. Tell us a little bit about your family, your hobbies. Who is Daniel Livingston?
Yeah, so good question. I ask myself that question sometimes. I'm not going through a midlife crisis though, so don't worry. We currently live in the Hunter Valley in Quarraballong, in the foothills of the Watagans, on the other side of the Watagans to Martinsville. That might be more familiar to a lot of Adventists. There are still a lot of Adventists living on our side, the northern side of the Watagans as well. We've lived there for the whole time of COVID. We moved just before the first lockdown, and I work at Hunter Water, the local water authority for the region, yeah, so I've been working there since I left It Is Written Oceania back in 2011. It's the longest I've ever done any one thing in my life. We have moved around a little bit within Newcastle in that time, and the last move was out of Newcastle. So we're country dwellers now, which is great. So yeah, two young kids and a wife, and loving it.
Awesome. It sounds like you live in a beautiful place.
Yes.
Now, I really enjoyed your article. For anyone who doesn't know where to find it, it was in this issue, which was a few issues back, but it is still also available online. But I think it raised some really important questions that at some stage we as people of faith find ourselves asking and grappling with. In today's day and age, people get really overwhelmed. I'm one of those people, I would say, who I look at faith and I look at studies or science and I listen to podcasts that have no religious affiliation and often get overwhelmed because it seems like they both have very valid things to say. And so I guess my starting question for you, Daniel, is how should we as humans navigate the crossroads of all of this stuff and determine what is, I guess, true about the world we're in?
Yeah, so I think science has been given a slightly overprivileged status in modern society, even at the workplace. And I'm certainly not talking on behalf of my employer. So this is me just talking on behalf of myself. But where I work, we try to make the best decisions, on behalf of our customers and so forth. And often there is a view that a science-based decision is going to be the best decision. But in reality, the way that we make decisions, we being society, the world, humans, is not entirely based on science. And if we were to make decisions just based on science, then our decision making would fall short in a lot of areas, because we as humans naturally make decisions based on our values, our preferences, and a lot of those things do not have scientific answers. You can't ask a scientific question, let alone give a scientific answer as to what is better out of two options. All you can do is, science can quantify things. It can measure something, but it can't explain why, and it can't adjudicate on value. So science is a limited perspective on the world, and it's not the only way at arriving at truth. It can't answer questions of why, for instance. So it can answer questions of mechanism, but it can't answer questions of agency, and it can't answer questions of value either. So I think it's important from the outset, and this what I'm saying now doesn't apply just in the faith and science realm. It applies to an atheist as well. Science is a limited subset. it's a very useful subset of epistemology, like the way we find knowledge and truth. But yeah, it's certainly not the only one, and it's not sufficient if we want to live a fulfilled life.
I guess what I'm thinking about as you're speaking is even the concepts of compassion and the value of human life. Like when we often will watch a documentary, a nature documentary, and they'll say, "Oh, the animal kingdom is ferocious. You know, there's death and there's survival of the fittest," and those sort of concepts. That can be, you know, seen as if we're doing things just on the numbers, we see that the ramifications of that can be things like eugenics, where it's like, well, genetically this person isn't, you know. So I guess that's the most dangerous part of what you're suggesting, is that the ramifications of taking science is the be all and the end all to the nth degree. It's quite a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, and I think where my so what I just said before, my article didn't really go into that dimension of the question of the place of science, the fact that it's limited in terms of what types of questions it can answer. What I really pursued more, in more detail in my article, was the fact that science is done by people that have a limited perspective, limited awareness of all of the relevant facts, and inevitably bring bias to the questions and to the answers. And, which evidence we look at, we're all subject to that confirmation bias. Or, there's several biases that humans bring, and that's why there's processes within the scientific endeavor to limit that, such as peer review. But even those processes are also subject to the frailty of humanity. And there's plenty of well-documented evidence of where and how science has fallen short in many areas.
Yeah, sure. You've done a good job. Obviously, there's a lot more to expand on in this article, but you have a pretty short word limit. So yeah, there's a lot more that could be said. But I guess one of the conflicts in the Adventist church is that people always talk about like science versus scripture, and what do we do when these two truth-finding, I guess, methods don't agree? Because I guess what we're saying as Adventists is that we have like a divinely inspired prophetess, we have a divinely inspired book, our hearts and minds can be divinely inspired, but simultaneously we are also, I guess, a church who has a deep respect and appreciation for education and science. Like we're probably one of the denominations that have the most higher education juries, for example. And so we do see that we have these cases where we look at these two different truth-finding tools, science and scripture, and sometimes they don't agree, which is a challenge. So what do we do, I suppose, when we see those things that don't align? Like, how do we grapple with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and look, it comes up in any Christian's experience. We are bound to come across a popular viewpoint that is at odds with the Bible, and that popular viewpoint will often have a scientific basis of sorts. So, for instance, in the area of health sciences, there's plenty of scientific arguments for, let's say, a ketogenic diet or a paleo diet or whatever. I think there's plenty more scientific evidence that a plant-based diet is at least good, if not better than those alternatives. But yeah, if you're just looking at a particular narrow subset of the science, then yeah, we can come unstuck in any area of our beliefs, because there's such a wealth of published science, and there's bound to be something that will challenge most areas of our belief, whether it's to do with age of the earth, health, gender and sexuality. Like, there's such a plethora of avenues of scientific inquiry. And look, that's I guess a feature as well as a limitation of peer-reviewed science and the scientific endeavor. a feature in that, you know, you can have the popular narrative and challenges to that, and, you know, divergent views and opinions, and you know, science should follow wherever the evidence leads, but there is always going to be evidence that is difficult to fit in with a particular view, and you know, I think as Christians, I don't think we should be trying to evaluate every question that comes up to get to the bottom of it and square away exactly how science agrees with the Bible. And if we can't square it away, then we question the Bible. I think there's always going to be areas of disagreement. Over time, those areas tend to resolve. Some of them, you know, are still hanging for, you know, centuries later. But, you know, in the area of archaeology, for instance, you know, we found a lot of the evidence that was missing to back up the biblical narrative, for instance. And in the area of health science as well, you know, there's been so much evidence that's accumulated to support the Adventist health message and so forth. But so I think what we need to do as Adventists and as Christians is remember that the way we treat the particular class of knowledge that we get from inspiration and revelation, we treat that as though it is correct by definition, like it's revealed, it's, you know, it's inspired. Science does not qualify for that sort of treatment. It is not by definition correct. It's by definition part of the scientific endeavor, and, you know, that usually is useful, but it's often incorrect. And, you know, in medicine, you know, as the article stated, like, you know, doctors in training are taught that half of what they learn at university is going to be proven to be wrong. And so if we take that with the findings of science, you know, as they are in peer-reviewed literature, then, you know, we don't have to get particularly anxious when there's an area of conflict between inspiration and revelation and science, because, you know, the jury's out in the science area as to what you know, where the scientific evidence will eventually lead in the area of revelation and inspiration. If it truly is inspired by God, then it's going, you know, it's always correct, it's always reliable. Now, we do need to, and God does ask us to evaluate, test all things, you know, prove all things. So it's not like everyone that claims to be a prophet, you know, gets that instant tick of approval of everything that they say is going to be right. But I think the approach we need to take with inspiration and revelation is if there's been consistent demonstration that this is, you know, there is reliability in the things that in the claims that it makes, and there's power in what it says, then you don't have to get 100% confirmation of every question by peer-reviewed science for it to get that tick of, yes, this fits the inspiration category.
We seem to have a tendency as Adventists to promote, skite about, if you will, blast from the rooftops any science that backs up for example, the health message. Let's say that, because that's a big core. In fact, in recent years, the health message, we've seen programs like CHIP and stuff, and they're recording stats and results from those programs, which is science. It is showing and demonstrating that those things are effective, they're working. Is there a danger, though, in promoting the science that does back up, or vindicate is the word you used in your article, too much, or too heavily relying on that science? What are the dangers that we might run into by doing that?
Yeah, look, it's difficult to say that we shouldn't do that, because there is certainly positives to be gained by comparing our health message with science and seeing the alignment there. That, you know, that's faith affirming. It encourages the scientific endeavor, and it encourages, you know, promotion of health. You know, in general, it's a good thing. But I think there's a subconscious danger, and I think that's what you're alluding to, Jared. And I think it's also what I try to bring out in the article, and that is, if in our minds we place science in the role of judge and jury and allow it to, in our minds, vindicate our health message, then by implication, that's also saying that where there's disagreement, that science, peer-reviewed science, has the role of being able to condemn our health message as well. So I think vindicate is too strong a word. I think when we find science that agrees and aligns, we can see that as supporting and providing corroborating evidence. But we're always going. We know that we're always going to find peer-reviewed scientific literature that comes to alternative conclusions. That's the way science tends to work. You have motivated industries such as the food industry. There's a number of industries that have motivation to publish only that science which will support the sales of their product, and they usually make those acknowledgements at the end of their paper that this was sponsored by the food industry or whatever industry it was, and that's a clear inherent bias to publish things that will support that particular industry, and it may not always be consistent with either truth, the Adventist Health message, or good science. Sometimes it can still be consistent with good science, but not consistent with the Adventist Health message, and that's when it's a specific narrow question is being answered with ignoring other relevant questions, and that still qualifies as science, but it can suggest conclusions that that don't always work for what we want to believe, what we believe and want to practice.
Yeah, you talk about, I guess, on this question that Jared asked, you talk about this idea of I guess people like writers like myself and Jared looking at these things and being like, oh, look, it aligns with our faith, we were right, you were wrong, kind of thing. And I've definitely been guilty of using said claims in my work to strengthen a point and ignoring kind of or not even thinking about what else that says. So I guess in thinking about people like writers, but also pastors and health professionals and speakers and so on, maybe not is it such a bad thing to use those, because you kind of just answered that, but like, have you noticed people doing that in a way that, I don't know, is cringy, or maybe that suggests something? And like, how can they actually, like, should we be more open about the things that we don't agree with?
Yeah, perhaps. Look, I don't think there's a strong criticism of the way that pastors or writers have used appeals to science to support or vindicate our beliefs or our health message or whatever. And to be honest, it's not something that I was even aware of until relatively recently. And it's a minor quibble. It's not a major quibble. And actually, what prompted me to write this article was seeing a presentation on YouTube actually that said something along the lines of science the Adventist Health message or something, whatever it said, I can't remember. But and I actually watched it and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fantastic presentation. But I thought that title kind of made me think: is vindicate the right word? And I think I wouldn't say that it's a bad title, but I think it can be improved.
Sure.
Do you have some, I guess, tips for us or some things to think about that you've found helpful in your own journey with science and with just making good decisions in terms of using science responsibly? Like, I find not everyone understands the scientific method in the same way that not everyone uses scripture responsibly, or in that sense. So how do we, or the media even, how do we interact with the media? We don't always do it responsibly because not everyone has the same level of media literacy or understanding of what the companies are trying to do or how they're pushing things. So are there some ideas that we can understand about the scientific method that help us to approach science in a more balanced way, not in a throw everything out with the bathwater, sort of way, but an actual, this is how we know to be discerning. Is it good science? Is it bad science? That sort of thing.
Yeah, look, you're prompting me in my mind to go down a particular rabbit hole that's very technical, and I'm not even the best person to speak to this. It's the area of statistics and uncertainty, and often the way that science is used and misused is a misunderstanding of the inherent uncertainty in scientific data and conclusions. And I think that's something that, you know, we don't all need to become stats experts, so statistics experts or uncertainty experts, but I think it's useful to be aware that there is inherent uncertainty in nearly all scientific measurement and projections and so forth. There are some things that are absolute, but there are some things that have a significant range of uncertainty, and we being society and humanity, the media, I don't think it's peculiar to Adventists at all, but or Christians at all. We struggle with the inherent uncertainty in scientific conclusions and data and measurement and predictions. So having some awareness that there's a certain certainty and an uncertainty range associated with a measurement and a prediction. There's some percentage that it's likely to be within this range, and if it's outside of that range, it's not it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that there's inherent uncertainty, which and that extrapolating that conceptually means that that there's always room to improve the understanding of something or the measurement of something, and I'm going to say something that sounds a little trite, because this can be used in both directions for making whatever argument people want to make. But the use of the phrase "the science settled on something" is can be misused. I mean, it is a valid thing to say at times, but it's also it kind of tries to wrap up this whole uncertainty conversation that I'm talking about in a way that's unhelpful, and I think that awareness can be useful for conversations of all things in science, whether it's health sciences, whether it's climate change, whether it's origins. There's a bunch of areas of science where the area of climate change probably doesn't challenge Adventists in terms of our belief systems, but health sciences certainly does, and origins even more so, and gender and sexuality as well. There's a bunch of things where the awareness that there's uncertainty, and then of course there's biases, and there's corruption, like that. There's a bunch of things that are going to mean that science and scientific results need to be well filtered if you're going to reliably make life decisions based on your particular understanding of a scientific question. But yeah, in terms of communicating science, I think just an awareness of the fact that there is uncertainty, and based on scientific data and evidence, then you'll want to have somebody involved that understands that in a quantitative way.
I like what you said earlier in the conversation, that you don't have to get like 100% confirmation for everything as well. Like dust hasn't always settled on everything, I suppose. You are a dedicated Adventist Christian, and you've also spent a lot of time understanding and using science, I understand. So you've got good credibility and understanding in both fields. I'd be interested to know how you approach situations in your own life where there is a conflict between, say, peer-reviewed literature and the Bible or prophecy or so on.
Yeah, look, so what I'm about to say might sound a bit overly dismissive to some people, but in my mind there is no conflict. I follow the Bible and revelation, inspiration, 100%. Like for me, when there is apparent contradiction, there's always the question of, do I understand the Bible or spirit of prophecy accurately or not? But assuming there's no issues in interpretation, then I'll always just put my faith down, put my anchor down where the Bible and spirit of prophecy are, and let science sort itself out, which it usually does. I mean, so there's some questions that still there's not perfect alignment there, but science is fallible. The Word of God isn't. Yeah, and that might sound a bit too dismissive for people that are really struggling in a particular area. And hey, asking the question, well, is God reliable? Can I put my faith in His word? And the reason I've got to that point is because over many years of experience of trusting God, tasting and seeing that God really is good and that His word is reliable, and seeing how many times science ends up aligning with inspiration, revelation. After all, I'm quite confident that every subsequent discrepancy can also be similarly resolved.
What about the common saying, and I'll play a little bit of the devil's advocate here, that the Bible isn't a scientific textbook. Like, it comes from a certain culture, context, place. I've heard people say that, and they might have questions about this conversation today. That, how do we, we've talked a lot about the science and how we understand and interpret the science well, but how do we make sure we're responsible with the Bible as well? In the flip side of that, so that because you've said, and I agree, we should put the Bible higher than science, but how do we understand things that perhaps the Bible hasn't said anything about, when science might be involved?
Yeah, well, if the Bible hasn't said anything about something, then if the science says something conclusive about something, then the Bible is silent. Then and I would say that my approach to climate change probably fits that category. I don't think that the Bible has anything conclusive to say about climate change. I mean, there's things that it says, like bookends around the whole question of climate change, but it doesn't provide any, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't provide any answers to the question of, are humans currently, or are they going to, from the perspective of the Bible writers, going to influence global climates in a noticeable, significant way? And so, I don't think that's a matter that needs to have a biblical defense or argument around. Like, from my point of view, the Bible is silent on that. And if someone wants to argue for anthropogenic climate change, knock yourself out. If someone wants to argue against it, knock yourself out. I've worked in the field, and I'm not aware of any fundamental flaws in the science that that international organizations such as IPCC use in their scientific projections for or scientific analyses for climate change. I'm not aware of any fundamental flaws in that, and so I tend to accept. I wouldn't say believe the science, because you just accept it and use it, and science is always subject to being questioned anyway. But then there are other areas where the Bible appears to say something in figures of speech, the four corners of the world, or something like that. And some people make the case that therefore the world is flat. I think that's a bit of a stretch. I think there's room for the Bible using figures of speech, and we say the four corners of the compass in our modern lingo in any case. So I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that the Bible is making a comment as to the structure of the planet that we live on, when it uses language such as that. I mean, it also uses language that's consistent with a spherical globe as well. So I understand that there are areas where some people will try to hang their hat on particular use of language in the Bible that seems to indicate something that's far outside of what our scientific understanding of the world would say, and that's a dangerous territory. But I don't think there's any hard and fast rules in doing that. I think we need to allow language to be what language is, and language should not be approached in a deterministic way. It's a descriptive tool, not a deterministic tool.
There are many more questions we could ask you on this topic. I feel like I've only got through half of what I want to ask, but
sorry, I'm going to
no, it's fine. We are running out of time, but we'd like to end things on a practical note. on Record Live. And so for people who are overwhelmed with all the conflicting information and finding really difficult, do you have any advice or resources or anything that you can suggest or leave with those people?
Yeah, good question. Look, the Bible is a fantastic resource. I also think that science is a fantastic tool. So, modern education in science has, achieved a lot through the last couple of hundred years. So and further than that, but the scientific endeavor has largely been, most publications are, probably within the last 10 years, to be honest, but we're exponentially expanding our scientific knowledge. Not all science is good, and not all science is faith affirming, but by a large chunk of it is. And I think for Christians who want to engage in scientific endeavors, by all means, go for it. It can be a faith affirming endeavor. It can also be a faith shocking endeavor if not done in a supportive environment. But yeah, so if you're interested in exploring science further, places like Avondale will be a supportive environment to do that. You can do it through a public university as well, and just make sure that you're keeping in connection with God, and do that through the Bible. So tools that you're asking for, the Bible is, it's the best tool. It's the best tool for truth and knowledge. It has scientific wisdom as well. It's beyond the more advanced than the era in which it was written. And the same for the writings of Ellen White. Like her health insights are so far advanced of the times in which she wrote them. So yeah, I would just encourage people to get, dive into inspiration and revelation. You've caught me a bit offhand in terms of, are there other particular resources that I would point to say, this is a particular author that really tackles the subject well? And there are plenty. And I'm sure if people reach out to the team at Record, or myself, we'd be happy to point you in good directions. But look, the Bible and all inspired writings, and as a church we put the writings of Ellen White in that category, are a fantastic place to build our faith, and they encourage scientific endeavor. So all of the avenues of epistemology, that's a difficult word to leave you with, finding knowledge and finding truth are good and helpful, but the best ones are clearly the Word of God.
Inspiration from God is our greatest tool, is what I think the message of our conversation today and the message of your article is really reinforcing for us. And I think that's an important thing to take with us from this conversation. Hey, Daniel, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to chat with you and to bandy about some of these ideas. And for the rest of you, we will have a break for a couple of weeks. I think this is our last conversation for a couple of weeks. I've got some travel and we've got a lot on our plates, but we'll see you again soon for Record Live, and God bless.